Hey, it's Brent from the White Lab Workshop. Today I'm going to show you how I made my rolling workbench a little bit more functional by taking it from this to this. Let's get to it. The top is made of plywood with solid pine edging, and I wanted the shelf to match the look. So I started by taking measurements between the legs for 1x2s to use for edging. I cut a 2x6 down to a rough length that would get me what I needed. Next, I took that 2x6 to the table saw and used my jointer sled to cut the rounded edge off and get a clean, straight edge. Then I started cutting strips for 1x2s out of it. I ended up with several extras, but with my wife around from the White Lab house, we always have a use for extras for simple frames and other projects. For the shelf, I had a 4-foot by 4-foot plywood project panel, so I didn't have to worry about handling a full 4x8 sheet. So I got to work cutting it down to size. Next, I leaned the shelf as close to in place as I could get it so I could mark where I needed to cut away the corners to make room for the legs. To cut the notches out, I stood the plywood on end with clamps on my crosscut sled, then raised the blade enough to make the cut. The legs have a square footprint, so I was able to set the stop block and blade height once for all the cuts. It always feels great when things fit nicely into place. To attach the solid wood edging, I employed a trick I learned from Mike Farrington. Cut up a bike tire and put it in a spring clamp to make a DIY edge banding clamp. It worked like a charm. I made sure to leave the edging slightly proud of the plywood so I could sand it flush. I used my router to ease the edges over with an 1/8 inch roundover bit. To mount the shelf, I found some scrap 2x2s laying around to use for mounting support. I cut them to rough length, then pre-drilled holes in 2 directions for screwing into the frame and the shelf. Then I glued and screwed the supports into place. I used my handy Dewalt 90-degree driver attachment with my Ryobi impact driver. See, we can all get along after all. Next, I started cutting the plywood for the drawer stack box. Before mounting the drawer stack box, I applied 2 coats of poly to the shelf and the outward facing sides of the box pieces. I used pocket holes where I could to mount the drawer stack box, so I drilled the holes. Then I started mounting the box to the table. I used a combination of pocket holes and traditional holes to secure it all. This was the most awkward and uncomfortable thing I've done since I mounted the dust collection box to my table saw. Thankfully, I was able to get the camera set up well enough so we can all enjoy my discomfort. Time for the drawers. I sized the drawers all equally, so it was pretty easy to batch them out. Then I cut the 1/4-inch plywood base to match the full dimensions of the drawer bottoms. To make the drawer faces look a little nicer, I used 1x6s instead of plywood. Here's everything I need to build my drawers. I used Brad's new drawer building technique from Fix This Build That. It calls for pocket holes in the front and back pieces so they get covered up or hidden. Here's how I keep my work pieces from slipping out of place when I mount the pocket screws. I position them flush with the end, then clamp a backer piece down to put pressure on when I'm screwing them into place. This works perfectly. It takes an extra few moments to set it up, but it's totally worth it. The one joint I tried holding in place with my fingers ended up shifting slightly. To mount the drawer bottoms, I applied some glue to the bottom of the frame, positioned the 1/4 inch plywood bottom, then nailed it in place with 1.5 inch brad nails. The brads will hold the bottom in place until the glue dries, which provides the real holding power. If it ends up needing more support down the road, I can add some screws too. Mounting the drawer slides isn't so bad if you have spacers that fit your setup. In my case, I started with a 1x2 that I used for glue-up support, then moved on to some 1/2 inch MDF spacers as I worked my way up. For the drawer bottom, I laid down an offcut of 1/4 inch plywood as a spacer to keep the drawer off the bottom shelf. Then I aligned the drawer to be flush with the box front and marked where the drawer slides needed to be mounted to the drawer box. I slid the drawer and slides out far enough to mount the first screw, then enough for the second screw. The third screw is unreachable, so I pulled the drawer out to mount the last screw. Next, I used my MDF spacer to mount the second, then the third drawer slides. I used the same 1/4 inch plywood spacer between the drawers. Here I am all proud of how well my drawers work. And here I am realizing I screwed up the spacing of the drawers and the bottom drawer face would actually block the second drawer. Classic. It's a commonly known fact that I'm incapable of completing a project without messing up at least once. I decided that I could fix my mistake by leaving the outer slide components in place and adjusting the slides on the drawers themselves. To do this, I used those 1/2 inch MDF spacers to give the drawers a little bit more wiggle room than that 1/4 inch plywood did. For the drawer faces, I used the old card trick. Find the spacing you want by stacking playing cards one at a time until you are satisfied. Then put that same number of cards on the other side for even support of the drawer face. I then clamped the faces to the drawers and pre-drilled, then screwed them in place from the inside. I wasn't initially sure what I was going to do for drawer pulls, so I didn't want to drill holes until I had that worked out. I ended up deciding to make some simple drawer pulls out of 1x2 chunks cut with angles for grip, so I drilled the standard 3-inch hole positions and mounted the pulls. I applied a couple of coats of poly to the drawer faces off camera and called it done. I'm really excited to put these enhancements to use. Since my shop spends most of its time being a garage, I need to make sure that my project workspaces are mobile. By adding additional storage to my work table, I can move all the tools I use on a project together rather than having to scatter them around when I need to use that full tabletop. If you like this video, consider hitting that thumbs up button and subscribing to the channel. We've got a lot more woodworking projects queued up and we'd love to share them with you. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.